Hi, my name is Angelica Bly. 2 weeks ago, I stood at the altar wearing a dress that used to belong to our housemaid, marrying a man I'd never met, because my stepmother said it was the only way I'd ever be of value. They changed the locks on the house before I even got back from the ceremony. They forged my mother's will. They told the world I didn't exist, cut me out of wedding photos, edited me out of family videos. But the worst part? My own father. He watched it all happen, then handed me a bill for the flowers. Why would a family go this far to erase one of their own? And why? Did they choose a beggar for my husband? Would you believe me if I told you he wasn't who they thought he was? Or that the only real mistake they made was underestimating me? It started with the envelope. A soft ivory color, embossed edges, the kind of stationery you'd expect for a southern wedding of taste and tradition. Valora handed it to me at the breakfast table with a casual flick of her manicured wrist. "Don't bend it. That paper wasn't cheap," she said, sipping her coffee, not even looking up. I slid a finger beneath the flap, expecting to see something elegant, maybe even beautiful. And then I froze. My name wasn't there. Printed in shimmering gold calligraphy. "You are cordially invited to the union of Mr. Rowan Leeds and—" A blank space. Just a line. No name. My breath caught. This must be a draft copy or something," I muttered. Valora's gaze lifted just long enough to pierce mine. "It's just a design oversight, sweetheart. The groom's name is what matters anyway. Besides, everyone knows it's you." She didn't say it with cruelty, not overtly, but there was something in her voice, a subtle dismissal, as if I were a placeholder, not a person, like I should be grateful to be mentioned at all. That was the first moment I felt it, the quiet unraveling of whatever dignity I thought I had left in that house. Later that afternoon, Zinnia stormed into my room with a plastic garment bag slung over her shoulder. "Here," she said, tossing it onto my bed. "Found something for your big day." I unzipped it slowly, praying for lace, silk, anything soft. What met my fingers was stiff and scratchy. A yellowing hem. Mismatched buttons. It wasn't even white. It was beige. And not the elegant kind. "This was Rosa's," Zinnia said. "Remember her? That maid who married the janitor? Mama kept it in case one of the staff needed a backup gown." I stared at her. "You want me to wear this?" Zinnia rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. You're not exactly debutante material. This isn't about the dress. It's just a formality." I didn't respond. I didn't scream or cry. I just carried the dress into my bathroom, locked the door, and let the silence wrap around me like that God-forsaken gown. And the next morning was supposed to be for family portraits, Valora's idea, an elegant documentation of our family's generational beauty, as she put it. I came downstairs in a plain blouse and skirt, all I had that wasn't stained or borrowed, only to see the photographer already snapping shots of Valora and Zinnia in matching lilac ensembles. My father stood behind them stiffly, arms crossed like he didn't know where to put them. When I asked if I should join, Valora smiled tightly. "Oh, we already have plenty, darling. These are just feature shots." I didn't push it. I just stood there, arms at my side, watching as my family posed like I didn't exist. We arrived at the church at noon. The sanctuary was stunning. Tall stained glass windows, polished oak pews, a string quartet quietly warming up near the altar. Guests chatted softly, dressed in pastels and linen suits. It should have felt special. Instead, I was led through a side door, past the dressing rooms, and into a small tiled vestibule near the restrooms. "This'll be your holding spot until they call for you," the event coordinator whispered. She looked about 19 and nervous. I stood there, awkward in the borrowed dress, holding a bouquet that still had the price tag on it. I remember catching a glimpse of my reflection in the glass pane of a nearby door. The woman staring back at me looked tired, washed out. Her shoulders slumped. Her mouth didn't know whether to smile or scream. And then he appeared. Rowan. He looked exactly like what everyone had whispered. Threadbare suit, scuffed shoes, one sleeve slightly shorter than the other. but his eyes held something mine had lost. Kindness. "Do you want this?" he asked softly. His voice was low, calm. He didn't sound embarrassed. He didn't look smug. He just looked present. I didn't answer right away. But after a long pause, I nodded. Not because I did, but because saying no would have required strength I didn't have anymore. He gave a slight nod in return, then stepped aside as the coordinator gestured toward the sanctuary doors. We didn't walk in together. We weren't announced. No one rose to greet us. There was no music, no flowers tossed, no camera flashes. It was as if I was being ushered into a courtroom, not a wedding. Valora caught my eye as I walked past the first row. Her smile was tight, her posture perfect. "Smile," she whispered as I passed. "This will be the best thing that ever happened to you." Behind her, Zinnia snickered, adjusting her purse. I stood beside Rowan at the altar, my hands trembling, heart numb. The minister spoke. I couldn't tell you what he said. My ears buzzed, my skin itched in that awful fabric. I just remember nodding when prompted, repeating what I was told, letting them tie the figurative noose with every vow. When it came time for the ring, Rowan reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of twine, a string. He tied it gently around my finger. "There," he said softly. "Something simple." I swallowed hard, not because of the string, but because no one, not a single person, stood up to stop this. Not my father, not even me. As the minister pronounced us husband and wife, I turned my head slightly, listening for applause. There was none, just the scrape of shoes against the floor as people stood and shuffled toward the exit, like the end of a long meeting. I didn't cry, I didn't collapse, I didn't scream. I just stared at that string on my finger and wondered if it could unravel the life I used to know. I wasn't wearing my name, I wasn't wearing a dress of my own, I wasn't standing next to someone I chose, and yet, somehow, this was my wedding day. By the time we left the church, the light had started to shift, late afternoon fading into something dimmer, quieter. I didn't remember the drive back to the house. I was in the back seat of Valora's car, next to Zinnia, who spent most of the ride checking her lipstick and texting. Rowan sat in the front, quiet as always. No one spoke to me. The car pulled into the circular driveway. As I reached for the door handle, Valora cleared her throat. "You won't be needing to come inside," she said, eyes straight ahead, voice smooth like she was reading a menu. I blinked. "I just need to grab my bag." Valora exhaled as if I had asked to borrow her jewelry. "Your things were moved this morning. There's no need to go back in. You're a married woman now. This house isn't your home anymore." I looked past her, toward the house. My room, third window from the left upstairs, was dark. "You already changed the locks?" My voice cracked more than I wanted it to. She didn't flinch. "It's standard procedure. We had a locksmith come by after the ceremony. It's best for everyone." I turned toward my father, who had stood on the porch the entire time, arms crossed, eyes low. He didn't speak, didn't wave, didn't meet my eyes. "Dad?" I asked, hoping, praying. He scratched his jaw and mumbled, "You'll understand one day." That was all I got. Rowan walked around to my side of the car and opened the door. He didn't touch me. Just stood there. I stepped out slowly. The cheap heels Valora insisted matched the dress already cutting into my skin. I didn't have a purse. No phone. No bag. No money. I was a bride with no address. Zinnia leaned out her window just enough to say, "Hope your new life's as glamorous as you dreamed," then laughed like it was the best punchline she'd delivered all year. They drove off. Just like that. I stood there for a minute longer, not sure what to do. The wind picked up, catching the hem of my dress, Rosa's dress. The mothball smell had settled into the fabric by now. Every breath felt like it was pushing me further from who I used to be. I started walking. Where? I didn't know. Somewhere. Away from them. Cars passed. A few people looked at me, but no one stopped. It was probably quite the sight. Woman in a dirty wedding gown, walking aimlessly in heels too tight, bouquet wilting in hand. At one point, a A neighbor across the street opened her door. "You okay, sweetheart?" she called out. I paused, nodded. She hesitated, then stepped back inside. When she returned, she brought out a denim jacket and handed it to me. "Might be a chill tonight," she said. "Thank you," I whispered. She didn't offer more, just shut the door gently behind her. It was enough. About 4 blocks down, Rowan caught up to me. He hadn't driven. He'd followed on foot. "There's a place down the road. Cheap, but clean," he said, walking a few paces behind. I didn't turn around, just nodded once and kept walking. The motel came into view, a red neon sign flickering half its letters. It was one of those places locals whispered about but never admitted to knowing, but right then, it looked like shelter. Rowan walked up to the front desk and paid in cash. No questions, no commentary. Room 104 smelled like bleach and stale air. The bedspread had a floral pattern older than me, but it was dry, and I could lock the door from the inside. He handed me the key and stepped back. "Are you staying too?" I asked, unsure if I wanted him to say yes or no. "I'll be outside. Just knock if anything." He left before I could respond. There was a small envelope sitting on the nightstand. Valora had handed it to me just before the car ride, calling it marriage paperwork. I hadn't looked at it in the rush of everything else. I opened it now. Inside was the marriage license, already signed, and a copy of a prenup I didn't remember agreeing to. I scanned the lines, and then one sentence stopped me cold. Should the wife initiate divorce proceedings within the first 3 years, she waives all rights to any inheritance, assets, or claims tied to the family estate. They hadn't just cast me out. They'd made it so I couldn't come back. Even if I tried, it was all premeditated. The wedding, the dress, the invitation with no name, the ring. I looked down at my hand. The piece of string was still there, frayed now. Absurd! A memory surfaced, Zinnia whispering in the hallway the night before. "Let that be a reminder of what you're really worth." It hadn't hit me then. Now it did. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me erased. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall for a long time, long enough for the sun to set completely. The motel sign outside cast red light against the blinds. There was a knock. Soft. I opened the door slightly. Rowan stood there, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. "I brought you some water," he said, "and a sandwich." "Thank you." I took the bottle but didn't open it. He hovered a moment longer. "I didn't know they'd do all this." "Didn't you?" I asked. He hesitated. "Not like this." I studied him. He didn't look like a liar. He didn't look like a savior either. Just human. I closed the door gently. Back on the bed, I curled my fingers into a fist, feeling the string dig into my skin. A part of me wanted to rip it off. Another part needed to keep it on, to remind myself where I stood. I wasn't the fool. Maybe they were. Morning crept in through the yellowed blinds of the motel room, not with gentleness, but with a blunt sort of indifference. The kind that doesn't care if you've slept or not. It just shows up, on time, whether you're ready or not. I sat up slowly, feeling the dull ache in my shoulders and the stiffness in my ankles from walking more than I should have in heels that didn't belong to me. The denim jacket from the neighbor was folded neatly over the motel chair. My wedding dress, if anyone dared to call it that, was bunched in a ball on the floor, already beginning to wrinkle beyond saving. The string around my finger remained, now tighter than I remembered, as if my body was trying to absorb the lesson it symbolized. I washed my face in the cracked sink, pulled my hair back into a low knot, and slipped on my shoes again, though my feet protested. I didn't have many options. My phone, clothes, everything else, left behind in a home that no longer claimed me. The walk to my father's print shop wasn't far, just a few blocks away, past the diner where he used to take me on Saturdays. I glanced at the window as I passed. They had a specials board out front, written in the same thick, uneven handwriting I remembered from when I was 10. For a moment, I thought about stopping in for a coffee, just for something warm to hold, but decided against it. I didn't want anything clouding what I came to do. The bell above the shop door jingled when I pushed it open. The sound hadn't changed. The place hadn't either. Same shelves of paper samples, Same dusty counter with stacks of outdated invoices, same photo of my father shaking hands with a local councilman framed behind the register. Gideon Bly was seated behind the counter, flipping through a catalog. He looked up when he heard the door, but didn't react with surprise. Didn't stand. Didn't smile. Just a nod. "Morning," he said, like we were two neighbors meeting in line at the post office. I stood there for a moment, unsure how to respond to such a hollow greeting. Finally, I replied, "Hey, Dad." He nodded again, then reached behind the counter, pulled out a styrofoam cup, and gestured toward the ancient coffee maker. "It's from yesterday, but still hot." I shook my head. "No, thank you." Silence settled between us like dust, heavy, familiar. "You look tired," he said eventually. I let out a breath through my nose. "I was locked out last night." He didn't flinch. "Valora told me. Said it was for the best." "For who?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slid a manila envelope across the counter. "What's this?" "Everything Valora asked me to cover for the ceremony," he said without looking up. "Invoices, catering, flowers, venue deposit. She wanted it handled through the shop account." I opened the envelope. Inside were printed receipts, all neatly paper-clipped, itemized, labeled, efficient. There was no note, no congratulations, no "I'm proud of you," just numbers. "Did you help pick the dress?" I asked, voice steady. "No. That was between Valora and Zinnia. You know how they are." I nodded, slowly. "Yeah, I do." I folded the papers back into the envelope and placed it back on the counter. "Why didn't you stop it?" I asked, not accusingly, but like someone asking for a weather update, something you can't change but want to understand. He scratched his chin. "It was already in motion. You know how she gets when things are planned." "I'm not a spreadsheet. I'm your daughter." He met my eyes, then looked away. It wasn't the right time for a fight. "And when will it be?" Still nothing. I moved to a nearby stool and sat down. The edges of the seat dug into my legs. I didn't care. "You watched them humiliate me," I said quietly. "You watched them dress me in someone else's past. You stood there when I was erased from the invitation, from the photos, from your house." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, a habit I remembered from childhood. When I scraped my knee, when Mom got sick, when bills stacked up, it was always that same motion. "You know how Valora is," he finally said. I leaned forward. "Yes, but what about you? What kind of man lets his daughter get sold off like livestock and says, 'You know how she is'?" His voice cracked for the first time. I didn't want to lose the family. "You already did." The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was grief. The slow kind. The kind that sits at your dinner table and sleeps in the guest room. It had been there between us for years. I just hadn't named it until now. My gaze drifted to the corner of the shop, where a dusty bookshelf held forgotten office supplies and an old picture frame. I stood and walked toward it. In the frame was a photo, me at 10, holding a soccer trophy, flanked by my mother on one side and Gideon on the other. We looked happy, though I now knew that moments like that were fragile, temporary. "She would have stopped this," I said. "She hated conflict," he replied. "No, she hated injustice. There's a difference." His face softened then, not in agreement, but in admission. "She always said you were sharper than me," he murmured. Maybe she was right. I turned to him, finally asking the question I had buried for years. "If it had been Zinnia in my place, would you have let them treat her like that?" His breath hitched. He didn't answer. That was enough. I stepped back toward the counter, lifted the envelope again, and tucked it into my jacket pocket, not because I wanted it, but because I wanted the record. "I hope whatever comfort you got from staying silent was worth it," I said. He didn't move. I walked to the door, hand resting on the knob. There were no hugs. "No, I'm sorry. No. Let's talk later." Just a man and his regrets, surrounded by printers and dust. I didn't say goodbye. I closed the door behind me like I'd never open it again. The sky had turned dark by the time I got back to the motel. The walk from my father's shop wasn't long, but it felt like it had taken something from me. Each step added another stone to the growing weight in my chest. I didn't go straight inside. I sat outside for a while, perched on the edge of a concrete parking block, watching headlights pass along the nearby road. The hum of tires over wet pavement felt like a lullaby for people with somewhere to go. Eventually, I stood and walked inside. Room 104 still smelled like bleach and age. Rowan wasn't there. He'd gone somewhere, maybe to clear his head, maybe to give me space. I was grateful for both. I kicked off my shoes and dropped the envelope from my father onto the nightstand like it burned to touch. I didn't want to see those numbers again. I didn't want to be reminded of how a father could reduce his daughter to a receipt. The air in the room was cooler now. I wrapped the neighbor's denim jacket around me again and sat at the edge of the bed. My duffel bag sat in the corner. I hadn't touched it since we checked in. I reached for it now, pulling the zipper open slowly, not even sure what I was looking for. Something. Anything. My fingers brushed against worn leather. I pulled out the Bible. It had been my mother's. The pages were soft from use, corners dog-eared, margins filled with her neat, looping handwriting. I used to see it on grocery lists, school permission slips, birthday cards. I hadn't seen it in years. And yet, when I opened the book, there it was, like she had just written it yesterday. A folded piece of paper slipped out from between Psalms and Proverbs. I opened it slowly. Her handwriting greeted me like a voice I hadn't heard in forever. My Angelica, if you're reading this, I know something must have gone terribly wrong. Maybe not today, maybe not this year. But I know your heart, and I know the people you've been left with. If one day you feel like a burden in your own home, remember, you were born with purpose. No one can give you your value, and no one can take it. I felt something rupture inside me. Not a sob, not a scream. Something softer, deeper. I let the tears come. Let them fall onto the paper, soaking the edge of her words. It was the first time I'd cried in days, not from fear, not from anger, but from the ache of being seen when I didn't think anyone remembered who I was anymore. I read the letter again, and again. She hadn't left me much. But this felt like a map. I tucked the paper back into the Bible gently and set it on the bed beside me. As I reached to zip up the bag again, my fingers brushed against another envelope, thicker, cream-colored, tucked deep in the side pocket. I didn't remember packing it. I pulled it out and opened it. It was the original copy of her will, the one she had given me during my sophomore year of college, folded and sealed. I had forgotten all about it. With trembling fingers, I pulled out the sheets. Legal language filled the page, dense and dry, until I reached the section titled Beneficiaries. There it was, my name, clear as day, Angelica Bly, primary beneficiary to all assets, including but not limited to the family estate, personal effects, and residual accounts held jointly with Gideon Bly. I blinked, my hands shook. Valora had told me the estate was Zinnia's, that it had always been hers, that my mother had never specified anything. She said the lawyers confirmed it, that there was no contest. I grabbed the copy of the marriage license Valora had handed me before the wedding. I laid the two documents side by side on the motel nightstand and began to compare. Everything looked official, stamped, signed. But not by the same hand. My mother's signature on the will I held now was strong, familiar, graceful. The signature on the one Valora provided, the one Rowan and I had signed during the rushed ceremony, was almost identical, but just off enough. I reached for my phone, realized it wasn't there. It was still at the house, probably reset, probably erased. I stood up, paced the room. The prenup Valora gave me, now sitting folded on the edge of the Bible, mentioned that I waived all inheritance rights. How could I waive something they told me never existed? The light flickered overhead. Rowan walked in just then, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. "You okay?" he asked. "I think I've just found the first crack in their plan," I said quietly, not looking at him yet. He placed the coffee on the table and approached slowly. I showed him the 2 documents, the handwriting, the mismatch of details. "They forged something," I said. "Maybe not everything, but something." They knew what they were doing. He studied the pages without touching them. "And this?" I asked, holding up my mother's will. "She gave it to me years ago. I didn't think I'd ever need it. I forgot I even packed it." Rowan didn't say much. He rarely did. But he went to the motel desk, borrowed a copier, and came back with 5 duplicate sets of everything. Then he handed me a pen. "Make notes," he said. "Let's build this out." We sat side by side on the bed, going through timelines, signatures, names. I began listing everyone involved, who signed what, who notarized what, when things were filed, where. He didn't ask why, he didn't doubt, he just helped. At one point, he handed me a tea bag from his backpack and filled the motel cup with hot water from the bathroom sink. He placed it gently on the windowsill to steep, then said, "You don't have to drink it. I just thought it might help you think." It did. It helped because it was quiet, because it wasn't forced. Because it was the first act of care I'd felt in longer than I could remember. I circled a date in red ink, Monday morning, courthouse. I wasn't going to march in shouting. I wasn't going to storm any gates, but I would walk in with what I had, and I'd let the truth do the rest. The courthouse was colder than I remembered. Not just in temperature, it was the atmosphere, the way people moved quietly, like truth itself could be overheard if spoken too loud. The walls, once stark beige, now felt like witnesses. I stood in front of the intake desk, holding a file that might just tip the weight of everything they thought they'd buried. "Do you have an appointment?" the woman behind the glass asked, her voice flat, polite. "I have 2 versions of a will," I said, setting down the folder. "And one of them has a forged signature." That got her attention. She pushed a button and buzzed the inner door open. "Please wait in the records archive," she said. The hallway smelled like toner and linoleum. I was escorted into a back room filled with metal cabinets and old computers. The clerk, younger than me and nervous in her posture, asked me to sit while she took the folder to her supervisor. 20 minutes passed. Then whispers started. First just one staff member, then 2 more joined her. A man in a collared shirt I assumed was her boss walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a thick folder with the Bly estate label, and laid it beside my copy. They began cross-checking. My hands gripped the edge of the seat. I watched their eyes flick back and forth between signatures, between stamps, between paragraphs. The supervisor finally approached me. "Miss Bly, would you step over here, please?" He motioned me toward a small side desk and lowered his voice. "The version we have on file was submitted posthumously, a week after your mother passed," he said. I nodded. "And?" He hesitated. "The signature on this one doesn't match the verified documents we have from her driver's license and past legal filings. It's close. Someone went to great lengths to make it believable. But it's not hers." I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just said, "Thank you." He gave me a copy of the report they'd write up and a contact for the probate officer. I left the building with my shoulders straighter than they'd been in days. Rowan was waiting outside on the bench, sipping something from a paper cup. He stood up when he saw me. "Well?" he asked. I handed him the paper. "It's not hers. They know it. They'll have to open an inquiry." He looked relieved, but not surprised. "I think it's time I tell you something," he said, leading me down the sidewalk. We walked 3 blocks in silence before he stopped in front of a corner cafe. It was the kind of place that smelled like burnt espresso and comfort. We slid into a booth, and he didn't speak until the waitress brought our drinks. "I overheard something," he said finally, hands wrapped around his cup. "Back when your stepmother called me to arrange the wedding stuff, I was on the phone with Zinnia, and they didn't realize I hadn't hung up." I stayed still. "They were talking about you, about getting you married off so they could tie up the last loose end. Valora said something like, 'Once she's out, the will's useless. The girl's never been smart enough to fight it.'" He paused. "I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know you." I looked at him for a long time. "And now?" He pulled out his phone, thumbed through messages, and handed it to me. I saved the voicemail. I pressed play. It was a bit scratchy at first, but then I heard her voice, clear, smug, cold. "Once she's married off, she's not our problem. That signature's gone. She'll never prove it." Zinnia laughed in the background. "You really think she won't try? She can try all she wants, but I buried her the day she put on that dress." My stomach twisted, but my mind didn't falter. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. I simply whispered, "Send that to me." He did. That night, back at the motel, I sat on the bed with the printout from the courthouse in one hand and the audio file looping on my laptop. I didn't scream. I composed an email, no subject, just the recording and a sentence. "You signed more than paper. You signed your legacy away." I sent it to Valora's personal address, not the business one, not Zinnia, just her. I knew she'd see it. I knew she'd hear her own voice. I didn't include a threat. I didn't have to. She would know what came next. The truth always does damage on its own. I closed the laptop, poured myself the cup of tea Rowan had left on the counter, and sat in silence. Not brooding. Planning. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing down everything I knew Valora had her name on. Bridal boutiques, rental properties, a consulting firm she ran under Zinnia's name. I mapped out her reach the way you'd map an empire, which, in a way, it was. But every empire has its weak walls. She built hers with fraud, vanity, and arrogance. I didn't want revenge. I wanted exposure. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to disinfect the wounds she left in my life. That's the difference between petty and powerful. And I was learning quickly which one I was becoming. I looked over the list one more time, then added a note at the bottom. Monday. Business filings. Look for co-signatures. Then I circled it. All I needed was one move, one undeniable act that would shift the balance of power forever. I hadn't planned on it being poetic. I didn't expect symmetry. But life, for once, gave me a sliver of justice wrapped in timing so precise it almost felt divine. 1 week after I handed over those forged signatures to the courthouse, I was sitting in a small cafe 2 blocks from the county records office. The same place where Valora had sat sipping her overpriced cappuccinos for years, telling friends about her legacy and how hard it was raising someone else's child. I stirred a lukewarm coffee and opened an email from a third-party firm I'd contracted through an attorney in Atlanta. The subject line was simple: transfer of deed completed. Below that, a single sentence: the property at 14 Marlowe Lane is now legally in your name. My childhood home. Mine again. The estate was technically in foreclosure. Valora had overextended herself. New storefronts, branding campaigns for Zinnia, a failed wedding expo that tanked hard and fast. I'd watched it unravel from a distance, patient and quiet. She didn't even know I was the buyer, yet. 3 days later, an official envelope was hand-delivered to the estate. It came with 2 sheriff's deputies and a civil process server. Valora wasn't home when they arrived. Zinnia was. She answered the door with a silk robe tied loose, makeup half done, and a cucumber slice falling off her cheek. "What's this?" she asked, blinking at the man holding the envelope. "Legal notice," he replied. "Effective immediately. You and any occupants have 30 days to vacate the property. New ownership takes effect this week." Zinnia laughed. "That's a mistake. My mother owns this house." The process server didn't flinch. "Not anymore." She slammed the door. 2 hours later, Valora called her attorney. 4 hours after that, she stood in her kitchen, the same one where she used to lecture me about posture and speaking too loud, holding the letter in her trembling hands. She called me. I didn't answer. She texted, "You wouldn't?" I replied, "I did." The next morning I drove there, not to fight, not to gloat, just to look. I parked on the side street and walked up the familiar path. The hedges were overgrown. The door paint was chipped. It looked tired, just like the people who used to run it. I used the spare key Valora never knew I had. Mom hid it in the back of the mailbox years ago, taped behind a metal flap. She said it was just in case. The house was silent. I walked through the foyer first. Photos gone, the polished floors dusty. I touched the banister I used to slide down, past the hallway where I broke my arm once trying to rollerblade inside. The scent was different now. Less floral, more chemical, like they'd tried to scrub something out. In my old bedroom, I opened the closet and found it still there. My mother's scarf, hanging on a wooden hanger like it had been waiting. I took it down gently, pressed it to my face, let the scent fill my lungs. Then I heard her heels. Valora. She walked in like she still owned it, like she'd caught an intruder. Except this time, the title didn't belong to her. "You don't have to do this," she said. I turned slowly. "I'm not doing anything. I just walked into my house." Her face twisted. "This isn't you. You're not this cruel." "No," I said calmly. "That's why I didn't change the locks the moment the papers cleared. That's why I gave you 30 days. She scoffed. "You think this proves something?" "It proves I don't need to scream to be heard." Valora's mask cracked just a little. I saw it in her eyes, the first shimmer of fear, the kind that comes when someone realizes they no longer hold the upper hand. Zinnia entered behind her, wide-eyed, holding a latte and wearing slippers that probably cost more than my motel stay last week. "Mom, what's going on?" "She thinks she owns this house," Valora snapped. "I don't think," I replied, pulling a folded copy of the deed from my purse. "I do." Zinnia's voice pitched higher. "This is crazy. You can't just throw us out." I raised an eyebrow. "You threw me out in a wedding dress." "That was different," she cried, her voice breaking. I nodded slowly. "You're right. Back then I had no power. Now, I've got enough to let you stay longer than I should." Valora stepped forward. "If you do this, you'll regret it. You're becoming just like me." I smiled. "No, that's why this doesn't come with police escorts or cameras. I'm not you." She opened her mouth again, but I walked past her, down the stairs, through the hall, toward the front door. Zinnia followed me. "Please," she said, softer this time. "Can't we talk about this?" I stopped. "You had every chance to talk when I asked for a seat at the table, when I showed up at dinner and there wasn't a plate for me, when I was told to wear a maid's dress to my own wedding." She reached for my arm. I pulled away. "If you ever cared, you would have stood between me and her," I said. "Instead, you watched." Her eyes welled up. "We're sisters." "No, we're strangers who lived under the same roof." I stepped outside into the daylight. It was warm, breezy. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in. Then I walked to my car. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't leaving behind something that had defined me. I was reclaiming what was already mine, and I didn't need anyone to see it to make it real. 3 days after I walked out of that house, the storm hit. Except it wasn't in the courtroom, and it wasn't delivered by lawyers. It came through a screen. It started with a post. Zinnia, true to her curated aesthetic, uploaded a polished video compilation to her social media. Bright music played over slow-motion clips from what she labeled our family legacy. There were shots from the bridal shop, grand photo shoots, perfectly posed family dinners, Valora raising a glass, Zinnia blowing kisses to the camera. And then came the wedding footage. My wedding. But not all of it. The video was cropped to cut around me. When I appeared, it was in the background, blurry, almost accidental. No mention of me, no ring ceremony, no bouquet, no introduction. The caption read, "Grateful for real family, traditions that endure, blood thicker than bitterness." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Instead, I simply watched. Within hours, the video was everywhere. Her followers, mostly brand-chasing sycophants, poured in comments. "She's always been the star of the family." "Wait, wasn't there another sister?" One comment stuck out. "Wasn't this the wedding where her stepsister married some homeless guy?" The trolls followed fast. "She's just bitter because she didn't get the inheritance. Sounds like a jealous ex-stepdaughter. Classic case. She should be grateful they even let her in the video." I didn't reply. I didn't comment. But I was watching. And while they danced in the court of public opinion, I finalized the one thing I'd been planning long before the eviction ever made headlines. 2 days later, I signed the final documents. Valora's bridal loft, once Savannah's most prestigious boutique, the place where she had built her empire one satin stitch at a time, was no longer hers. The business had been legally transferred, dissolved, and repurposed. I filed the paperwork with the city. I contacted the press. Then I made my own post. No filters, no music, no smug caption, just a short statement written in plain black letters over a white background. Valora's bridal loft will cease operations, effective immediately. In its place, a scholarship foundation will be launched in honor of Madeline Bly, a woman who gave everything to a family that didn't deserve her. Financial aid will be provided to young women seeking careers in law, design, and business. Attached were 3 images. The first, my mother's handwritten will. The second, the court's signed confirmation of forgery. The third, a transcript of the audio where Valora said, "Once she's married off, she's not our problem." I didn't tag Zinnia. I didn't call her out. I didn't need to. By sundown, Valoragate was trending. It wasn't just the forged documents that caught people's attention. It was the silence that followed. Neither Valora nor Zinnia had anything to say. Influencers unfollowed. Brand deals quietly vanished. The bridal companies that once co-hosted expos with them pulled out, citing ethical concerns. Zinnia posted a shaky video 2 days later. Her eyes were red, mascara streaked, voice hoarse from what I assumed were hours of rehearsed crying. "I've always tried to be a good sister," she said, looking into the camera. "I didn't know what Mom was doing. I was just caught in the middle." The comments weren't kind. "You didn't seem caught when you took her dress. Real family, huh? Funny how you found your voice after the money left." By the time the press circled back for a follow-up, she had deleted the video. Her Instagram went quiet. Valora didn't post anything, didn't comment, didn't defend. She just disappeared. Someone said she'd shut down her accounts, packed up, and left town. Rumors floated around that creditors were calling, that lawsuits might follow. The woman who used to run Savannah's bridal scene like a queen now ruled nothing but silence. And I didn't feel victorious, not in the way I expected. There was no confetti, no parade, just the soft hum of peace I hadn't known in years. One afternoon, sitting in my small apartment above a bookstore I'd rented short-term, I scrolled through my emails and found one from a young woman. She wrote, "Hi, I'm applying for the Madeline Bly Scholarship. I never knew her, but if you're anything like her, then I just want to say thank you. You're giving people like me a second chance." I sat back, the laptop warm in my lap. That was the win. Not taking something back, but passing something forward. Still, a voice lingered. One more conversation I had yet to finish. One more sentence that had never been spoken aloud. Not in court, not online, not even to myself. And I wasn't done. Not until I said the one thing none of them ever had the decency or courage to say to me. The ride home from the gala was quiet, not awkward, just full of everything that had been said and everything that had finally been released. I sat in the passenger seat, the award plaque resting on my lap, still cool from the air inside the venue. The silence between Rowan and me wasn't uncomfortable. It was understood. He hadn't needed to say a word when I stepped off that stage, and I hadn't needed him to. I'd said it for myself. When we pulled into the driveway, the porch light flicked on automatically. The motion sensor caught our steps as we made our way inside. Rowan set his keys on the kitchen counter, peeled off his jacket, and disappeared down the hall without a word. I thought maybe he needed a minute alone. Maybe he wanted to give me one. I poured a glass of water, leaned on the counter, and finally let my hands relax. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding the plaque until my fingers throbbed. A few minutes passed before I heard his footsteps returning. I turned around to find him holding a small black box. No speech, no grand gesture. He set it on the table in front of me and took a step back. "What is it?" I asked. He gave a slow shrug, like he wasn't sure what it meant either. "Something I've had for a while, been waiting for the right time." I looked at him, then at the box. My fingers hesitated for a second, then flipped it open. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, gold, no frills, no string, no rope, just real. I swallowed hard. My throat was tighter than I thought. "You don't have to wear it," he said quickly. "This isn't about proving anything. I wanted you to have something that was yours. Without conditions." I didn't respond, not right away. Instead, I picked it up, turned it in the light. It was warm already. "You know," I said softly, The last time someone handed me a ring, it was meant to mark the end of my identity. He nodded. This one's not meant to replace anything. It's just a new beginning. I smiled, quietly, with the kind of peace that doesn't need to show itself off. I slid it onto my finger. Perfect fit. That night, I lay in bed longer than usual before drifting to sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I was still unwinding layers that had been wound so tightly for so long. The next morning, I opened the front door to find an envelope on the porch. No return address, no postage, just my name. I didn't have to open it to know it was from Gideon. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it through 2 full cups of coffee. Eventually, I reached for the letter opener. Inside was a single page. Handwritten. My daughter, I know it may be too late for words to matter, but I wanted to say that I saw you. I just didn't know how to show it. I thought silence was the safest choice. I see now that it wasn't. You deserved more than what I gave, more than what I allowed. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know I was proud of the woman you became, even if I didn't help her get there. Dad. I read it once. Then again. Then I folded it neatly, tucked it into the back of the Bible my mother left me, and placed it back on the shelf. No anger. No tears. Just the understanding that some people are built to watch and others are built to stand. I had spent too long trying to earn words that never came. Now I had said the words they never could. At the next community event, another gala, smaller, less formal, I was asked to present the first scholarship grant in my mother's name. The recipient was a young woman named Lila, 23. Studying business, first in her family to go to college. Her voice trembled when she spoke, but her eyes were full of clarity. She reminded me of myself. After the event, she approached me near the exit. Ms. Bly, she said, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you do it? How did you stand in front of all those people and tell your truth without falling apart? I paused, thought about it, then smiled. I did fall apart, I told her. Just not in front of them. I did that part already. But when you've been broken and rebuilt by your own hands, there's not much left anyone else can take from you. She nodded, eyes wide. I want to be like that. You will be, I said. You already are. As she walked away, I watched her shoulders lift a little higher, like she had remembered who she was. I recognized that walk, that moment, because I had lived it, and now I had given it to someone else. After we cleared the dishes and the last light of evening dimmed outside our kitchen window, Rowan placed the box on the table. He didn't say anything, just slid it toward me with a glance that said more than words ever could. I didn't open it right away. We sat for a moment, both sipping tea, letting the silence carry its weight like a blanket fresh from the dryer. Warm, soft, necessary. The walls around us were still new. The apartment smelled like linen and basil. I'd planted herbs in tiny pots on the windowsill just a few days earlier. It was the first place I'd chosen on my own, not assigned or borrowed. Every pillow, every fork, every squeaky drawer, I knew them all because I picked them. I opened the box slowly. Inside, a ring. Simple, gold, understated. No diamonds, no engraving, no gimmicks, no rope. I looked up at him, searching his face, but he didn't meet me with some rehearsed proposal or grand gesture. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "This isn't a promise or a question. It's a truth. You're not anyone's second choice, not even your own anymore." My breath caught, but not because of shock. More because of how quiet the moment felt, how grounded. This wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't some makeup scene after a long fight. It was peace, offered freely. And for once, I was ready to accept it. I slipped the ring onto my finger. It felt right. Not in a movie magic way, but in the way a soft hoodie fits perfectly after it's been washed 3 times. Familiar. Meant. That night, I didn't toss in bed. I didn't stare at the ceiling or second-guess myself. I curled next to Rowan, our backs warm against each other, and I slept through without dreaming. Weeks passed. My days now began with early morning light flooding the kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing in a French press, and the gentle sound of Rowan's keyboard tapping from the next room. I worked part-time as an interior consultant for small business spaces. The money wasn't impressive, but the work mattered, and it was mine. I designed for the people I used to walk past without noticing. A Vietnamese nail salon needing a fresh lobby. A Jamaican takeout joint trying to fit more seating without losing space for their grandkids. A struggling boutique with nothing but hope and a chalkboard menu. I found joy in it. Not the kind that screams from rooftops. The kind that builds, quiet and steady, like a candle burning through the night. One afternoon, while sorting through tax papers, I stumbled across the unopened letter from Gideon. It had been sitting in the kitchen drawer since that morning weeks ago when I found it at the door. I hadn't been ready to read it then. I wasn't sure I was now. But I opened it. The letter was short. Angelica, I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But if you'll allow it, I'd like to start learning how to be the kind of father you should have had all along. I see you now. I hope one day you'll let me say that to your face. Dad. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and returned it to the drawer. Maybe one day I'd answer. But today wasn't about him. I thought about Zinnia too. Someone told me she'd moved to a smaller town a few counties over. Her social media was gone. Her endorsement deals had dried up. She was working part-time at a bridal chain store, ironically fitting dresses for girls who probably hadn't heard her name. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel vindicated. Just done. As for Valora, she'd reportedly moved into a rented condo outside of Savannah. No news coverage, no scandals, just a quiet fade into anonymity. I had no intention of ever visiting. That chapter, with its rough-edged pages and ink stains, was closed. Some scars still lived beneath my skin, but they didn't ache anymore. I wore the gold ring every day, not as a symbol of Rowan's love, though I knew it was that too, but as proof of my own. It reminded me that love doesn't always come in grand moments. Sometimes, it's in the way Rowan handed me tea without asking, or the way he reached for my hand when we walked through a crowded market. No performance, no pressure. My life wasn't perfect. There were still nights I woke up sweating from dreams where Valora was whispering, "You're not enough." But those nights came less and less. And in the morning, I made coffee, watered the plants, and started over. Not because I had to, because I could, and that was the difference. I used to think healing meant forgetting, that I had to erase every bruise, every ugly word, every moment I stood there while they stripped me of my dignity. But healing, I learned, is about standing taller, while still carrying the weight of what came before. I didn't need them to acknowledge my worth. I had finally learned how to do that for myself. I wasn't rescued by a prince. I rescued myself. And he simply waited where love would feel safe to return. Sometimes, the loudest justice comes from the quietest strength. Angelica didn't fight with fists. She fought with truth, patience, and dignity. So here's the question. What would you do if your own family tried to erase you? If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of your own worth, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more real, powerful stories just like this one.